am Black Cherokee. What some people don't understand is that Indians or Native Americans for a very, very long time were not considered citizens. And even once we were considered citizens, for many people who lived on reservations, they made it very, very difficult for folks to vote. One of the changes we saw in after 2013 was a sudden requirement that people on the reservation had to have street numbers and they couldn't use PO boxes. Well, people found that interesting because they had been using those PO boxes as their address for decades. Next slide. Now, the bill we are talking about tonight. I love this picture of a young John Lewis, the same young man who, in crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama, was severely beaten by police. And then we look at John Lewis, the elder statesman who at 80 was in Congress. And as we were struggling to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, it was really remarkable that we figured out here is the embodiment of a man who has literally spent virtually his entire life fighting for voting rights for people. Let's give him the honor of naming this bill after him. And a good part of the bill was from the Voting Rights Act that he had introduced back in 2012. Next slide. Now, our letter for June. Actually, I'm going to go back and I'm sorry, Noelle wanted to talk more about John Lewis.
That's okay. And hi, everybody. I'm Noelle D'Amico, Director of Social Justice at the Worker Circle, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here. Andrew's really stepped you through the key provisions of the bill. And when we think about John Lewis, if we can go back one slide, I just want to take a look at that picture for a moment, because he was an extraordinary man who's really passed the mantle of struggle on to us. John Lewis, from a very early age, I mean, he learned about Martin Luther King Jr. through a comic book when he was in high school at 15, finally met Dr. King when he was 18, was part of the SNCC movement, the desegregations and sit-ins at lunch counters and theaters in Nashville. He was one of the first freedom riders on the buses that were attacked, testing whether the Boynton rule would actually be in play. And he paid for our freedom and our ability to vote nearly with his life so many times. This man went to jail, he faced beatings, he is an extraordinary human being who I think it's good for us to dwell upon for just a moment, because John Lewis wasn't a saint. John Lewis was a human being like you and like me and like Andrea and like John, like everybody that is on this call and all the people across our country. And he reminds us that it is up to us. And one of the things that he said close to his death in 2020 was that each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, to speak up, and to speak out. When you see something that's not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy, he said, is not a state. It's an act. It's an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and a world society at peace with himself. And I think part of this is that what's remarkable about him is he didn't lose hope, even as he saw real regression in terms of the advances that he has spent his life working on. He charged us to not get lost in the sea of despair, to be hopeful, to continue to be optimistic, because our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a month, or a year. It's a struggle of the lifetime. And so, what John Lewis, in naming this bill after the late Congressman John Lewis, we remember his charge to us. And I want to say, especially to everyone who's on the call tonight who may never have made a visit to your member of Congress, it doesn't matter whether you've made a visit or have no experience. What matters most of all is that you have the chutzpah, as we like to say in the worker circle, to stand up, to speak out, to speak from your values, and know that that is sufficient. That is the most crucial piece that you can bring to any visit with a member of Congress. You don't have to be an expert in every paragraph of the bill. We're going to give you a letter, next slide, that will highlight the main points of why this bill needs to be reauthorized and what it will accomplish once reauthorized. Remember, this important bill will work on two fronts: the preventative side, restoring pre-clearance so that bad laws don't go into effect, and also on the side that, should discrimination occur, that we have an enlarged right to sue, and to sue under the Voting Rights Act to ensure that no one is discriminated against in the process of voting. So I want to encourage you to remember John Lewis. And yes, I will please put that quote in writing and send it. I'll drop it into the chat, and we'll make sure to send it in the email when we follow up. By the way, I want to highlight that there's a great new biography out of Congressman John Lewis. It's called The Beloved Community. It's by Raymond Arsenal. It came out in February of this year, and I just finished it 2 weeks ago. Boy, oh boy, is it a read. I promise you, it is a page turner. Get it from your library, your local bookstore. I commend it to you. So now that you've heard a little bit about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, you're realizing, okay, number one, it's a reauthorization of that Voting Rights Act of 1965. It has had clear bipartisan support in the past. It's in fact been reauthorized under 5 Republican presidents. And now it's our time. Now it's our moment. So we're going to open up and just see if you have any quick questions about the bill itself before we proceed on and help you take the next steps toward making a visit. Okay, I'm not seeing anything now, but don't hesitate.
There was one
Good.
question that I saw, and that question was, I'm scrolling through looking for it. We've got a lot going on in the chat. I like that. I like that. It was, what was the Boynton Act?
Yes, this was the act that desegregated transport, interstate transport. So what was being tested in the freedom rides was whether that was actually true. So in the point of the freedom rides, which were originally organized by the Congress on Racial Equality, is to put Black and white passengers together and to have them stay together through some of these states that still were living under Jim Crow. And so it was testing that law. And what's really interesting is the Boynton family is from Selma. So there's this really beautiful wraparound to Selma. And I guess was it Amelia Boynton's son, I think, was the litigant in that case.
Yes, yes. All right, we can, I'm not seeing any, oh yeah, we're gonna put the quote in writing, and there was, yes, and I see the answer. The book is The Beloved Community. And then we have a question: do the protections apply to people with disabilities?
Yes, the answer is yes, they do. They do apply. And in fact, one of the really important pieces also is that Section 2 of the bill that was terribly weakened by the court in the Brnovich v. DNC decision of, I think it was 3 years ago now. Um, what the VRA, what this new John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act will put some heft back into Section 2, which is the ability to sue in instances of discrimination, but also the pre-clearance. Again, remember, what will that do? It's going to require those states and those even local cities and counties that have histories of voter suppression, any kind of voter suppression, not just racial discrimination, discrimination according to language, discrimination according to physical ability. It's going to make sure that those laws, before they go into effect, are reviewed by the federal government. And that's a really important stop on some of the worst. In fact, Andrew was mentioning how voter ID laws went into effect after the Shelby decision of 2013. Literally within 24 hours, Texas had passed its voter ID law. So if you think people weren't waiting for this court decision, they were absolutely waiting for this court decision. And by this point now, we're a number of years past 2013, there have been nearly 100 voter suppression laws passed in 29 states, according to the Brennan Center at this point. And so we've got a lot of work to do. And so we're going to get on to talking about how to get going on that.
And I'm going to have a barking dog. So, Noelle, I'm going to ask you to do the letter. I see one more quick question in the chat. I will do that one before I have to go on mute and go and get the dog. The question is, what if my member has already co-sponsored the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? What do I want him to do? If your member is already a co-sponsor, and virtually all the Democrats are, then you're going to thank them for being a co-sponsor. And now what I would do is I would ask them, now this is kind of me, and I do things, I can be interesting. Is there a member on the other side of the house that they frequently work with or talk to? Remember, Congress, it's 535 people that sort of work together on a daily basis, 435 on the House. They go to the cafeteria, the same cafeteria. They work out in the same gym. You would be amazed at the number of members who have relationships with people on the other side. And while we are only there visiting maybe one day a month, they may have the ability to see this other member anytime that they want. So number one, we're thanking them. Number two, when the bill comes up again, they could do a discharge petition. We would want them to sign the discharge petition. A discharge petition would require 218 members of the House to say, we want this bill to go directly to the floor. And so again, we could go to the floor, have a vote. Realistically, do I think we are going to be completely successful in this Congress? No, but it's very important that people know, our electeds, that this is legislation that we want passed. Noelle, take it away. I've got to go get the dog.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing Carrie Whedon wrote in the chat, is there really a chance this will get passed? So let me just invite you not to do the odds for a second. Let's take a John Lewis moment, because the point here is we want to keep the pressure on Congress. Change doesn't come overnight, it comes over time. If we don't pressure now, it will be even harder to pressure later. And let's not write the end of the story. Let's keep those members that have not yet supported this bill in our sites, because this is a straight up all-American bill that they ought to be on, that prior Republican Party members and presidents have reauthorized, that ensures that every single American can make their voice heard through their vote. I mean, what is more American than that? So I don't want us to give up. I think it's easy to sort of say, well, I really don't want to visit that particular member who I already know, it's just I'm going to get an earful if I go there. Should I even try? Really, they're not worth it. It's always worth it. And in fact, sometimes it's a great learning experience. And so one of the things we're going to be doing is role playing in a minute. And this time, Andrea is going to be a fierce opponent of this bill. And I'm going to be the person coming in to try and convince her. So don't give up. Don't give in. Stay positive, keep that pressure on. Do not relent one bit, and let's see what we can get done. Emily, could you bring the slides back up? And we're going to take a quick look at the letter, and then we're going to go to John, who's going to walk us through how to find your member locally and begin to set up an appointment. So you'll see when the letter appears, and for those of us that have Zoom, I think you should be able to enlarge it if you click your cursor in the middle of it and then go to the right corner of your Zoom. It'll make it a little larger, but even if you can't see it, don't worry. We're going to send this letter to you, and then you'll be able to customize it, okay? So you can say, put your name in and your member of Congress name that you're going to go visit in. It's really a template for you to use. And this is what it says. It approaches it first in the context of Juneteenth, which is coming up. So we have an opening paragraph about that, with the idea that we have to continue the fight because the rights that are deserved by African Americans and by so many others have not yet been won. And so then we give a little bit of historical context about the bill, that it's a reauthorization of the VRA, or the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We explain that the Supreme Court gutted that in its Shelby v. Holder decision. And then after that, we talk about what the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would restore and strengthen in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In other words, we need to repair the damage that the court did in 2013 and also in 2021 with the Brnovich decision in Article 2. And we explain what the criteria are in the new John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to require a state to be under pre-clearance. And you'll read that it's 15 or more voting rights violations occurred in the state, 10 or more violations occurred, at least one of which was committed by the state itself. Remember, states themselves are committing these violations. So you'll get to read all the specifics in there. It will talk about the strengthening of Section 2. So the first part is the pre-clearance, that's Section 5. And then the second part is the right to sue. That's Section 2. We're strengthening that. And then the final is that it creates a new cause of action. So it allows people greater an expanded right to sue against discrimination. Even states and localities that have been implementing rules that end up being more discriminatory after the fact than the rule that those rules replaced. So let me try to make that clearer. Sometimes states pass rules and pass laws, and the idea is, oh, well, we're going to make a law and it's not going to be more discriminatory, but it turns out to be more discriminatory. And when that happens, those states or localities that implement a voting rule that makes everyone worse off than the rule that it replaced, we would have a new cause of action to sue the state for that. And then it just closes by supporting our commitment, and there's a place for you to put your name, and your address and your details, because of course, what you want to really convey to your member of Congress is you are a voter, you live in their district, you are holding them accountable for ensuring the advancement of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. All right. So what we're going to do is have John from the Center for Common Ground take you through how to find the local telephone number of your member of the House. Now, the senators are a lot easier to find. So John's just going to go through how you find it online, because sometimes it can be a little tricky. John, take it away.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Let me just share my screen quickly so I can show you how to find your local representative. We will be dropping a link in the chat. So this is the Find Your Representative page on the U.S. House of Representatives website. So simply by entering in your zip code, it'll pull up your district representative. For my zip code, I have one representative, so I can find their phone number listed right here. I can also visit their website and get other information, but the information you're looking for is right where my mouse is hovering. So this shows the district where he's covering, but let me show you another option of an address in, say, Baltimore, Maryland. I am in Maryland, so this is an area that I used to live. There happens to be two representatives in this zip code area. So if you have something like this, you just need to enter in your address to narrow it down. And so this is a result of, this is a previous address, but this would be my representative for this locality. And all the information I can find is right here on this page. And that is about as quick and easy as it is to find your representative.
And of course, what we want you all to do is to actually make a visit to your representative's local office. So you can give a call to that phone number there and get information and say, look, I'd like to visit your office here where I live. Could you give me the number to that so that I can make an appointment? I want to know where it's located. I want to be able to make an appointment to go and visit my member of Congress on an important bill to me, and they'll help you out there. Let's put the slides back up, Emily, if you would. And we're just going to advance to the section on the legislative meeting itself. Let's advance one more. There we go. So one of the keys is making visits in your hometown, making visits locally. That has an enormous impact on members of Congress. And so they will be very happy to see you. They will be very polite toward you. There is nothing to worry about. Sometimes the offices are in the funnest places. You know, there's one nearby that's next to a nail salon in a strip mall up here in Westchester. You know, you never know where you're going to find these congressional offices. So next slide, please. And the key here again is your voice. Now, it's wonderful if you're able to visit as a group, and we're going to give you some examples of roles that you would play if you're visiting as a group. But if you can't get a group together, please don't worry. It is fine to visit as your little old self. You just go marching right in, you make your appointment, and you have a one-on-one. And maybe you'll meet with a member of Congress. More likely, you'll meet with one of the staffers there. And don't feel like you're getting the cold shoulder if you get a staffer. Congressional staffers are people that you can really build relationships with, and they are the ones responsible for advising the member of Congress. So it's not bad at all to meet with a staff. In fact, it's often very highly productive. And the key here, again, is your voice. Why does this bill matter to you? Why do you support this bill? Are you impacted directly? Do you have an experience where you went and were unable to cast your ballot because of a state law that restricted your right to vote? Have you witnessed that happening to others? Do you support this bill because of a core value, or if you're a person of faith, a faith tenet that you have? Perhaps you have a family voting story, which is really compelling and underscores why it is so critical that every American be able to cast their ballot without impediments. Legislators need to be able to make arguments on the floor and to convince others. When you speak from your own experience, that story becomes a treasure to them that they can use when they're on the floor. And it also can be a little goad that sits on their shoulder saying, hey, you really need to think about this. A compelling story can do that. Next slide, please. One of the keys here is it's not a one and done thing when you're interacting with your member of Congress. You'll probably have the best way to make relationship is to, you don't go on one date, you go on multiple dates, right? You don't just call up a friend and say, hey friend, let's go do this thing. And then you don't talk to the friend again. The same thing. You're building a relationship here. So when you're in there, you're trying to influence that member of Congress. You're trying, if they don't agree, you're trying to persuade them. You're bringing some pressure. So for example, if I may be visiting on my own, but I can point to the fact that I'm part of a democracy circle of 7 people, or I'm coming as a representative of my local congregation that has 400 voters in it, and you can say, I could bring a little bit more pressure. I want you to know I'm speaking on their behalf. Of course, make sure you're authorized to do that before you do that. And then be consistent and persistent. Remember John Lewis, don't give up, don't give in. Next slide. Andrea, why don't you take this one?
Oh.
I've been talking for a while. You're back here.
All right, I'm back. I'm back. When you are working with a legislator, and again, it doesn't matter what level, your whole goal is to turn no into maybe. So when you go into an office, if the representative is on the other side of the aisle and right now they're a no, what your goal is you may not get them all the way to yes in this one visit, but you want to at least get them thinking about maybe I'm a maybe. And if they are a maybe, they've considered it, they voted on other legislation similar to it, then you want to turn that maybe into a yes. And even if you walk into an office and it's the most supportive office you've ever seen, there's still an ask. You want them to help you build support. Remember, you are there for one day. That is their workplace. They go there for 5 days a week.
Next slide, please. Of course, we've talked about building relationships, and remember, every time you visit, you're learning something more. As my nursery school teacher said, have your listening ears on. That is actually a good word of advice for life, but especially when you're in a meeting with a member of Congress, you want to listen. How are they making their arguments? Are there particular cohorts of people, maybe members in the military, that they're especially concerned about? And you're making some mental notes and probably some physical notes while you're in that meeting, so that the next time you go back, or maybe even later in the conversation, you can make a stronger argument. Next slide, please. If you go as a team, we suggest the following roles. If you have about 5 people, it works really well. You have a facilitator. That person introduces your group, makes sure everyone's introduced, and keeps that meeting moving. You have a secretary, and this is the person who's the note taker. It's very important to keep a record of what is said. And so you want somebody in that meeting taking a note, taking what is the plan for follow-up, and also making sure to have the cards of the person that you met with and perhaps the member of Congress's cards. An educator would play the role of highlighting 1 or 2 points of significance from the bill. The storytellers are the people who speak from their values, from their personal experience, or who tell a story that matters when it comes to this bill. And then finally, you want somebody who's really going to drive it home, because you want to make the direct ask. Ma'am or sir, will you be willing to support the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? And then zip the lip and wait. Don't try to jump in for them. Let them respond. Next slide. So how do you go about setting up a meeting? It is normal protocol to send an email. Now, some of the members of Congress may have a form on their website that they would like you to fill out to request a meeting, instead of just emailing directly, but usually you can email directly. And the person that you want to meet with is the legislator or staffer who handles voting or voting rights. And that will be in one of the staffers' portfolios. You can meet in the district office, or remember, Zoom is always an option. Then if you want to demonstrate a broad base of support and you have the ability to get additional people's voices in that room, you can get them to sign the letter that we're going to send to you. And so that's their way of saying me too, and it adds a little bit more oomph. Next slide, please. Once the meeting is concluded, you'll want to thank the legislator in person, but then follow up with a note of thanks. I actually suggest email because it can go really quickly and you're still on their mind, and then they get the note of thanks in email along with any other pieces that you may wish to send them. If they had a question and you weren't sure of the answer during it, don't worry, say, I don't know. I will look into that and get back to you. And then you'll email that. You want to build support and research before you go again to visit again. You may go more than once on the same bill. That's absolutely okay. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is that important of a bill. It is okay to visit multiple times and continue to make additional arguments, continue to build power. You want to stay in touch with your member of Congress. And also, even if the member disagrees, vehemently so, keep trying to find that common ground. There will be some common ground somewhere. Keep looking for it and don't give up. Next step. Next slide, please. All right, we're into role play now. We have a few minutes here, and Andrea is going to be a member of Congress, and Congresswoman Miller is not supportive at all of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And Andrea and I are just going to role play, imagining that I'm one person that is going into her office, and I'm going to visit on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and endeavor to persuade her to give her support to this bill. Now, what I will have done is I will have emailed the office and then followed up with a phone call to make sure that I know where I'm meeting, the date and the time. And then I'll show up at least 5 to 10 minutes early so that I'm always prepared, ready to go at the start of that meeting. So I've gotten out of my car and I've walked into the office and I'm in the waiting room, and then I'm ushered into the office where Congresswoman Miller is. Good afternoon, Congresswoman Miller. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Noelle D'Amico, and I'm part of the Worker Circle, a Jewish social justice organization. And I'm here to visit with you about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.
Well, Noel, I will tell you now, I do have another meeting. I've only got about 5 minutes. I did want to take this meeting, and this is another one of those voting rights bills I really, really have a problem with these bills. I really believe in election security. I want our elections to be secure. I want them to be fair. And I only want people who should be voting, voting. And this bill just seems to be trying to pull off all those protections.
Well, Congresswoman, I'm glad you brought up election security because that's a common concern that we have. And the good news is that the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is really a reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that Voting Rights Act has served us well over many, many years. Incidents of voter fraud are negligible. And so you can have confidence that the provisions within this bill will continue to uphold the integrity of our elections.
The population of our district has really, really changed. When I go through the district, I see so many people who don't speak English. It is a huge concern of mine that we make sure that only citizens are voting, and also that we make sure that our elections are protected. This is very, very different, this district, than it was in 1965. I grew up here. I am meeting people of countries I hadn't even heard of before.
Congresswoman Miller, one of the things that's near and dear to my heart in the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is the language access provisions for Americans whose first language may not be English. This is really important in my family. My grandfather, who came to this country and became a citizen of the United States and was able to vote, spoke only Italian. And it was the ability of him to understand in Italian and to vote that made a dramatic difference. The importance here is America is such a wonderful country, and it has welcomed so many people from other lands for a wide variety of reasons. But the great thing about our voting is that whatever language you speak, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would make sure that things are accessible to you in your language.
And there we hit one of my other problems. When people are citizens of the United States and you want to participate in our political process, you need to speak English. I'm sorry, that is just very, very, very important to me. If you are being part of the political process, that process is going in the language of America, and we speak English.
Well, this will be a point of disagreement for us. I understand that you have a concern about that, but I think what we may agree on is that every eligible American should be able to cast their ballot freely and securely. And that's something that the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act would ensure.
Well, Noel, thank you very, very much for taking time out of your day to come and talk to me about this. I will leave an open invitation to come back. I will think about it. I do not believe that my thoughts are going to be even more favorable. But because you came to see me, I will actually give it some thought. So
I
thank
really
you for
appreciate you
coming.
keeping an open mind. And if there are areas of particular concern that I heard from you were that we ensure that it was American citizens who are voting, that you would prefer that people speak English. Of course, this bill has been reauthorized 5 times in bipartisan manner to expand language access. So that is a core part of what has been our practice as a nation. But I hear your concern about that. And also that we ensure election security. And I'm happy to get back to you with some more specifics about the bill. I appreciate your taking time to meet with me, and I hope you'll give this another look. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, end of role play. So let's pull the slide down for a second here. And let's talk together. What are things you noticed that we were doing? Oh, thank you. Bravo, bravo. What did you notice about it? What struck you about either what Andrew was saying or what I was saying in response? I see Joan has written, make notes of his or her concerns. Yes, that's a really important piece to do. You saw me at the end circle back and try to lift up some of those. I was non-confrontational. That's right, Alice. I tried to keep my cool, even though you can imagine my ire when she got into, they must speak English in order to vote. I was trying to just calm myself down and breathe a little. I think
I had a member tell me that once.
yeah, yeah.
I kid you not.
Yeah, they will say things that really get your goat, and so just try to breathe through it and keep focusing on what your objective is. You're going to try to find that common ground. You're going to try to take a listening attitude. You're going to try to keep putting forward the importance of the bill. I did not go into with this particular member of Congress. You might have noticed I didn't try to articulate all the pieces of the bill. I didn't talk about states needing to go under preclearance. I didn't do that because I'm going to leave a letter with this member of Congress. And because I didn't, unless she had brought it up, I didn't want to bring up, imagining, say, I'm in Georgia. I didn't want to bring up SB, like the new voter purge law that just passed last month, SB 189, right? I didn't want to bring that up and say a law like that would have been prevented by passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, because I wanted her to stay as long as she could in my court. So I made a tactical decision there. You thank them for some other civil rights act they might have previously supported. Excellent, excellent, Alice. Alice had noted which members of the Republican Party had voted for the Marriage Equality Act as a signal for people that might be open, a little more open than some others. And it is something, whenever you can thank your member of Congress for something, start off with a thank you, because they're human beings. They're like all of us. They work long hours, they're exhausted. Usually the only time they hear from people is when they're being yelled at. They're not, it's that kind of thing. So if you can thank them in a genuine way, in a specific way, in a sincere way, that will be truly, truly appreciated. Persistence when she said she didn't have more time. Right. I pulled a little bit more time out of her, but not that much. I also wanted to respect the boundaries she had set, because I don't want to turn her into being annoyed with the fact that I'm not respecting the time that she had allotted. Anne is saying, I like that you noted our point of disagreement, but circled around to emphasize, I think we may agree in a non-confrontational way. Yeah, anytime you can do a pivot, it's fine to acknowledge where you don't agree, and there's no need to keep grinding the axe at that point. You might want to go away and think, like, could I have made a better argument? So that's what I'm thinking when I'm leaving this meeting. How can I improve my argument, particularly around her reluctance for those who are not fluent in English to be voting? Is there what could I have said more on that? And what could I bring back for another visit? So my brain will be thinking about those things. And thanks, Beth. She liked that I summarized at the end. Summarizing is really important. The idea that I'm going to touch back with her. She knows she opened the door to that, which was gracious. So wonderful. Thank you for being rational and loving. Yeah, sometimes, you just got to take a breath. Unfortunately, in this political moment, we are seeing some of the most outrageous, disrespectful behavior, sadly, by lawmakers themselves. So we're going to take the higher road. We're not going to give up. We're not going to give in. We're going to keep hopeful. We're going to keep optimistic. We're going to look for that common ground, and we're going to build it wherever we can find it. So with that, let's put up our closing slide, which will tell you that we have a final effective advocate coming in July. It will be our last one for 2024, and we're going to do a wrap up of all of the bills that we have discussed since January, and we're going to pay special attention to the processes for the passage of laws and the hurdles that get put up. Can you say filibuster? We're going to talk about those things in July. And again, this will be coming the day after, as we in the Worker Circle like to say, the yard site of Congressman John Lewis, the anniversary of his passing. I want to flag for all of you that is July the 17th, and there are going to be local actions happening all across the country to commemorate his life and to call for Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And you'll be hearing more from us at the Worker Circle on that. So stay tuned. There are many, many ways that you can be active with the Center for Common Ground, from postcarding to text banking to phone banking. The Worker Circle loves partnering with the Center for Common Ground. And for those of you who are part of the Worker Circle community, always feel free to reach out. Perhaps you want to think about building a democracy circle in your community as a way of forwarding your advocacy and building power at the grassroots. We'd love you to learn more out at circle.org, Democracy Circle. And with that, let me pass it back to Andrea to say goodnight for the Center for Common Ground. And let me just say thank you for spending your evening with us. What you do matters. The way you do it matters. The fact that you chose to show up tonight instead of the many other pressing things that are on your plate matters. Together, we are building the America we must become, and we're not going to give up.
Well, thank you, Noelle. Every time we do one of these, it ends up being so much fun, and I feel so good. And I'm going, oh, right, it's 8 o'clock. I'm not going to be able to go and lobby anybody. So I really, really hope that you had as much fun as we did, that you learned some things, maybe learned some techniques that you can use when working to win over legislators where you start out and you're just not in agreement. But again, remember, while you may not be in agreement on that one bill or at first, with persistence, and legislators do recognize when, all right, you've been in our office every month, and we disagree with the other 11 bills you brought to us, but this bill, we can actually support this one. They will remember you. You are building a relationship. You are actually educating them. So the work you do is so very important, and I really thank you for it. So yes, people are putting in the chat, and we need to take back the Senate and the House. We will be talking about next month why these bills are stalled. And the reason July will be our last one is we do a lot of electoral GOTV work. So in late July, we are going to need to very seriously get to our get out the vote work, so that we will be able to pass this bill in the House and in the Senate. So thank you so very much for joining us tonight. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. All right.
And we can stop the recording.